We appreciate you taking some time out of your busy slate to join us today.
Yeah,
why don't we
no
start
problem.
there? Just your breakdown of the game last night. Really love what I saw from Martin Jones in a Maple Leafs victory on Broadway.
Yeah, for the most part, I think the Toronto Maple Leafs played well. That was an excellent first period. Third period was outstanding based on the level of response. The second period, not so much. And Martin Jones had to make some key saves. Otherwise, that game was tipping in a hurry, right? You had Blake Wheeler score his second of the night, and that caused the Toronto Maple Leafs some grief. It's a one-goal game going into that third period, and it felt like not only was there a momentum shift, but maybe now the New York Rangers were going to take over the game, and Toronto didn't let that happen in that third period. Austin Matthews, guys, as we've seen it in the past, is playing at a higher level again. And he had more help, I would say, last night than he did against the New York Islanders. And then you look back to the weekend game against the Nashville Predators, and that might have been Toronto's best all-around game, right? Everybody was on board Saturday against the Preds in that win. So there's lots of reasons to be optimistic based on how individual players are playing, but also the reason now fans can appreciate why Brad Treliving and the Toronto Maple Leafs did their level best to keep Martin Jones in the mix. Because if you don't have a quality third goaltender in today's NHL, inevitably you're going to hit a snag.
Well, that's exactly it. And I don't think it's getting enough play in this market. The vital nature of picking up a veteran like Martin Jones, the thing they did with the signing bonus structure and all that stuff to make him stay with the roster too, I think was big. And that's the reason right there why they brought him in. Even another guy like Noah Gregor, like, for all the ridicule that's been placed in this market, sometimes rightfully so, some of the pickups have actually worked out. Like Noah Gregor's been a great story too, eh?
It really has been. And, that's no disrespect pointed towards Sam Lafferty, but when Sam Lafferty came over in a trade to the Toronto Maple Leafs, I think most of us thought, okay, geez, this guy's going to be a perfect fit. He's got speed. He plays with a little bite. He's going to be a real nice compliment to their top nine. And for whatever reason, Lafferty just couldn't find it. He just couldn't kind of get into a groove in Toronto. I'm seeing a little bit of that in Tyler Bertuzzi, although last night I thought Bertuzzi was pretty effective. So we'll see. In Noah Gregor, how can you go wrong? The man can flat out fly. And when you're a cap team like the Maple Leafs are, I think honestly, fellas, that's what we're going to have to look for the foreseeable future in Toronto. Yeah, the cap is going up $4.5 million next year, but guess who's getting that? William Nylander. That's who's eating up the 4.5. So your fourth line guys and maybe drifting up into your third line, they are going to have to be entry level, if not certainly lower level, affordable pieces. And when you can get Noah Gregor on the deal that he's on, it's a can't miss. And good on him. He's got some hockey smarts that maybe I wasn't as in tune with. And I was a bit surprised. So we find out late that Matthew Nyes isn't playing. They don't dress Reeves, an opt to go 11-7. So they bring in Max Lajoie. I actually thought that Yarncroc would be the player that would get pushed up, into the top mix. And instead they put Noah Gregor up there. And I think that is just recognition of the way he's played, not just in the last couple of games, but overall.
For sure. And like you say, the scouting staff and the backroom staff's going to have to do some digging like that. They find a guy like him on a PTO that everyone else missed, and he comes in and makes a serious impact is what they're going to need to be relying on down the future. And, you go back a couple of weeks, Dregs, and people are crying out for a trade and they want it now. And, the teams, they lose to Chicago and there's a little struggle here. And now maybe that'll probably peter out. But in reality, where you live, do you see anything on that market changing? Or is there any press for anything, or do you think this, if any changes get made to this, especially the back end, you think that's going to be more towards the trade deadline?
It's starting to feel that way, Rosie. And look, one thing, let's just qualify this. Brad Treliving is in on every trade conversation, whether he can afford the pieces or not. He just likes to be involved. He doesn't want to miss on anything, or at least not have a conversation about players that could make a difference. And that's been the case on all of the available defensemen that we've talked about. But I think Craig Conroy and the Calgary Flames, as an example, are being smart in this process as well. Now, you've got Chris Tanev, who would be a real nice fit in Toronto. He's hurt. It looks day-to-day. But, that kind of slows the roll of the Calgary Flames a little bit. And in fairness, Conroy recognizes that he's got commodities there, right? He moves Zadorov for a third and a fifth, and he took a little bit of heat in the market, but he knew that he needed to move one of those pieces. And so he moves the guy that really didn't want to be there anyway and gets, I think, fair value in return. Well, how do we know what the market is for Chris Tanev? Toronto thinks that it would be at least a second-round draft pick. Toronto doesn't have a second-round pick. So then if you're Conroy, you're likely looking for Toronto's first, because chances are it's going to be a late first-round draft pick, which is kind of in that late first, early second. You know, you can cut it both ways. There is no rush in Calgary to get that done. Likewise with Noah Hanifin. Aside from the fact that March 8th, fellas, it's not that far away. And you also don't want to get caught holding the bag here. It's good now because the Flames are more or less trending upward. They're staying in that wild card mix in the Western Conference. So competitively speaking, the owner is happy, but management can see what the timeline is. So I wouldn't say that Toronto is out of it, but I think that Treliving just recognizes, you know, if he's going to make an upgrade, he's going to have to be patient and wait for somebody to come to him too.
So, Dregs, yeah, you're so right. And I think the reality is, like, yeah, they love Chris Tanev, but as reality found out with Nikita Zadorov, there's other teams who love these players too. And I'm just spitballing. A name that keeps coming to my mind is a guy who actually pumped the wheels off Nicky Cousins the other day, Eric Goodbranson. 2 years left in his deal at 4. Brad Treliving, of course, knows him from his time in Calgary. Like, is that the sort of outside the box approach thinking that we should get ready for when it comes to the Maple Leafs and their quest to add on the back end? Like, I know Goodbranson probably fits in a 5-6 role, but like in general, they're looking to bolster that blue line, right?
Yeah, you know what, Nick? I mean, that's a good point. I mean, I haven't heard that name, but you know, we do know that the Columbus Blue Jackets are interested in doing something, and we've heard the names, the consistent ones like Andrew Peak or Boquist. Those names have been out there. Goodbranson is the type of player that Brad Treliving absolutely likes. No different than Rick Tocchet and the Vancouver Canucks. You know, they wanted to bolster their blue line in Vancouver, but they had something specific in mind, and it wasn't a right shot guy. They would have preferred Chris Tanev, to be frank, in Vancouver. If they couldn't get that, then, you know, make sure we get bigger and we get more physical. So they get that in Zadorov, and you'd get that in Goodbranson as well. I don't think it's just one piece in Toronto, and I think you guys would agree with that. When I look at that blue line, aside from Morgan Riley, who's playing lights out right now, it feels like that blue line needs some serious attention, if not an overhaul, to compete with the best of the best. And that's kind of what we think Toronto is. Like the Toronto Maple Leafs, when they play the way they did Saturday, okay, they didn't let that one slip away at MSG last night. Played pretty well against the New York Islanders. They're still a top contending team, but maybe it isn't one player. And that's why, look, I don't think this got enough play. There was a good amount of discussion between Calgary and Toronto on both those guys, on Zadorov and Chris Tanev. Well, why couldn't you do the same thing with the Philadelphia Flyers, with Nick Seeler and Sean Walker? Now, you're going to have to give up a heck of a lot. You know, like Philadelphia loves Sean Walker. John Tortorella loves Sean Walker. But maybe they get the best of both worlds in Philly. They trade him. He's a rental in Toronto, and then maybe they re-sign him in the offseason. But I guess to illustrate my point, what I'm saying is if Goodbranson is a fit, okay, he's a third pairing guy, as you mentioned, Nick. It feels like you still have to add something else to that blue line.
Yeah, and of course they got the flexibility. If you keep winning games and you feel really damn good about life, but you mentioned the deadline is coming quickly. You know, another name that really intrigues me that's just out there that nobody really talks about, and the team's off to like a so-so start, is Brett Pesce in Carolina, Dregs. Like they have just had a really, really bizarre start defensively. Kochekov's doing the flying poke check against Brady Tkachuk. That was something else. But do you get the sense that Pesce's going to be more of like an own rental type situation because we expect the Canes to be a legit contender this season?
Yeah, it feels that way now. But one thing that I know of Tom Dunn and an ownership of the Carolina Hurricanes, they don't like seeing assets just walk out for free. This guy's a real brutal negotiator. And that's why Brett Pesce hasn't signed an extension in Carolina. It's a bit of a head scratcher for me that it's taken this long. And, you know, I haven't checked in this week, but all indications up until last week were that they're a mile apart in terms of that discussion. So unlikely they're able to close that gap unless somebody bends. I don't think it's going to be the player side, so then it has to be Carolina. So then you have to really weigh your options. it's a dangerous game when you let a player of that magnitude walk or use them as an own rental, unless things are going so well where you just can't envision your blue line taking a hit like that. They're not playing that great right now, though, right? And you've got Brind'Amour and company who aren't satisfied with the way things have gone. Kochetkov has been good, so maybe the stability of their goaltending, which has been all over the place because of injury, will kind of get them through a bit of a stale patch here. But there's no doubt that teams call on Brett Pesce, as they should. And those calls are going to intensify as we get into the new year.
Speaking of calls, Dregs, we look and see that Craig Berube has been fired in St. Louis just 4 or 5 years after winning them the Stanley Cup. How long do you think he's going to last on the market? And I mean, I know the Leafs are going through a solid patch right now and people are happy, but with the yo-yo effect in that market, do you think anyone would want to see him replace Sheldon Keefe at any point in time?
Well, I don't know that they'll talk about it in Toronto because there isn't a reason to at this point, but it depends, Jay, on when are we talking here? I had a brief exchange with Berube this morning, and no different than any other coach that gets let go. They're deeply disappointed, and he wants to step away to some degree. Maybe there's a bit of relief because you can feel it coming, right? I mean, he's an experienced guy. Probably has had more than his share of conversations that weren't entirely pleasant with General Manager Doug Armstrong about how the team was playing, what he should be doing, what he could be doing. And then you get the coach who says, well, we need another defenseman. We need a penalty killer up front. We need a guy with some grit up front. And you end up in that sort of a world. But as I reported on Insider Trading yesterday, prior to that game and that loss, it had the feel that change was imminent, absolutely imminent. You guys watch St. Louis. Tell me if they play the way that they have played in past years. That heavy, hard checking game. No, they haven't been playing that way consistently this year. So the players weren't buying in, or they don't have the right players who are going to commit to playing that way on a consistent basis. So it just got to a point where Doug Armstrong felt like, he had to pull the pin. As for Sheldon and the Maple Leafs, Treliving didn't just extend Sheldon because he felt like that was the right thing to do and needed to buy himself a little bit more time to get to know the individual. But when you've got a coach, the pedigree of Craig Berube out there and available, man, that gets a lot of owners talking about it. And now that we're past the quarter mark and certain teams are closing in on 30 games, and now we've seen some teams make their coaching changes early in the regular season, that too fuels the conversation, certainly among ownership and senior management. I don't see the fit in season in Toronto, but if things were to go poorly yet again for the Maple Leafs, then and who's to say that Craig Berube isn't going to take the time that he deserves to just reset? He's not going to jump at the first opportunity that comes his way unless it's a perfect fit. So if there's a space for him potentially going into next season, then I think we could have that conversation.
Yeah, certainly. And I think with Keefe, I think he's going to be judged on what he does in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I think we're at a point where we've, they've sustained things a bit here in the regular season. They've made it to the Stanley Cup playoffs year after year after year. And I think he's going to be judged on that. Just before we leave you, is there anything on Nylander? Like, it's been so quiet on that front. I guess it's going to be one of those situations where it's going to pop out of nowhere, maybe, right?
Yeah, that makes the most sense because both the Toronto Maple Leafs and the agent Louis Gross are holding things tight to the vest here. And I get it. It's a noisy market. We always want to talk about it because it's a sensational story to talk about. I think Toronto was hoping that the player side would give up a little bit, and they haven't, nor should they. I mean, William Nylander deserves probably what he's going to get, which is $11 million or more per on an annual average salary. How do you argue with that? You don't like it if you're living in the Maple Leafs because that eats up all of the money that's coming the way of an increased cap for next year. But you know what? Put that in the category of good problems to have because this guy's an all-world player. But for the moment, it's all quiet there, Nick.
Make sure to check out more of our content right here on the Leafs Nation YouTube page. We got long-form interviews, we got clips, we got epic rants by Jay Rosehill. We simply have it all. And don't forget, You can find out much more at theleafsnation.com. Thanks so much for watching.